Welcome back and thanks for staying with Africa News Network First Fast Live. Now, former Eskom Chief Financial Officer Anoj Singh is testifying at the Eskom inquiry. He resigned from Eskom yesterday. Anoj Singh may have resigned, but another embattled Eskom executive, Koko, refuses to bow out. Eskom's head of generation and former acting CEO, Koko, says he's being targeted for fighting corruption. Koko is said to appear before the Parliamentary inquiry into controversies around Eskom on Wednesday. In his written submission seen by ANN7, Koko says he is being used to discredit the power utility and government. Koko was reinstated as Eskom's head of generation after being cleared by a disciplinary inquiry. Koko says the attacks on him have been very hurtful, and his affidavit lists several probes that have cleared him of any wrongdoing. The Clive Decker Hofmeyer attorneys and Nkonki Incorporated probes cleared Koko. Investigation found no evidence against him and no action needed. And the board instituted disciplinary despite CDH and Koko findings and exonerating Koko. And then the Eskom chair, Kulani Kombe, said the probe findings should be viewed within the prism of the public sentiments as opposed to solely focusing on the legal rationale. Koko suspended the pending finalization of disciplinary proceedings. And the disciplinary processes also cleared Koko on all charges. He was suspended between May and July 2015, pending the Denton's probe outcome. Now, the Denton's investigation also did not find any wrongdoing on his part. Koko has also rebutted the allegations around Eskom forcing Glencore to sell Optimum and favouring Tegeta. The accusation has been at the centre of media narrative of undue advantage being given to Tegeta. And Koko says he's not party to the series of events around Tegeta acquiring Optimum's assets. He asserts that Tegeta was first brought to the table by the business rescue practitioners and not Eskom. And Optimum, owned by Glencore, was not driven into business rescue by Eskom. And the affidavit states that Glencore held Eskom to ransom over higher coal prices and refused to pay a cent towards the 2.18 billion rand penalty for poor coal. Koko says that as per his knowledge, repayment to Tegeta was for procurement of emergency coal for Arnott and not for acquisition of Optimum. He says that Eskom's board tender committee authorized the repayment or prepayment. He also just supported the decision. And joining us on the phone line, Kulupa Siwe, he is the spokesperson for Eskom. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst. Good evening to you. Zamo Madlala is the General Secretary with Radical Economic Transformation Coalition. Good evening to all our guests, and thanks so much, Kulu. Can we just start with you? We've seen now back-to-back resignations of chief executives as Eskom. Has the cleanup, so to speak, started?
Well, yes. Good evening to Cindy and to our viewers as well. Well, the mandate that was given to the board over the weekend through a statement that was issued by the presidency was that they need to deal with the issues that have been sort of bedeviling this company for a long time around state capture and allegations of impropriety and corruption and those kind of things. So the mandate that was given to the board is that they needed to move with speed in terms of resolving the issues about people who are suspended and others in terms of the cases that have not been finalized. So they are now beginning to deal with some of those matters. And in the process, some people obviously are coming forward proactively to say that they would like to leave the employ of the company.
So what happens to the accountability question if they were found to have acted wrongfully and they have now resigned? How will the further investigation that may have implicated these individuals yield any results?
Well, let's take the issue around Mr. Presh Kavenda, for example. He was investigated late last year, I think around October, November, and then he was reinstated because there was no wrongdoing that was found on his part, and then he was reinstated last month in December. So now that he's been cleared, he felt that he had proven his case, I suppose, and then he decides to leave Eskom and focus on other things outside of Eskom. So and the same applies with Mr. Koko. Obviously, he's still with us now, although there was a pronouncement which was very clear coming from the statement that was issued by the presidency over the weekend, saying that the board needs to address the issues around Mr. Koko and Mr. Singh. And I think the statement is also explicitly saying that they need to be removed from Eskom. But so far, Mr. Koko is still with us because he has not formally said anything in relation to either resigning or anything to that effect. So because he's dealing with his issues with the parliamentary inquiry tomorrow in Cape Town, I'm sure after that we will have some idea as to what's going to happen going forward. But as you know, Mr. Singh himself, yesterday late in the evening, had written a letter essentially saying that he would like to leave the employ of Eskom, and that letter was accepted by the resignation at least was accepted by the board of Eskom.
What is your interpretation of Mr. Koko saying that the reports, or rather allegations around him, are intended to discredit himself and the government? What does that, in simple terms, mean?
Well, Cindy, I suppose we'll have to wait and hear from him tomorrow when he appears before the committee to expatiate a bit about what he said and what he meant. What we have read so far is that he's saying that he was also acting against some of the people who were doing wrong things during the time when he was the acting CEO, and it looks like some people felt aggrieved and they conspired against him. But I suppose he'll have to be given a chance tomorrow to expatiate a bit on what he meant and what he said in the statement that he had uttered to some of the media reports today.
All right, we appreciate your time as always. Khulu Phasiwe, Eskom spokesperson, joining us on the phone line. Tsepo Khadima, political analyst, and Zamo Madlala from the Radical Economic Transformation Coalition. Again, good evening to you. Just from Anoj Singh today, of course, fielding questions from parliamentarians. How do you assess the questioning, number one? And secondly, the responses, were they convincing, or can you already assess that there is some level of guilt on the part of Mr. Singh?
Look, I think the difficulty that this inquiry has is that it stands accused of having had a predetermined outcome, and they have done nothing whatsoever to actually prove otherwise, that they do not have a predetermined outcome. So when you look at their line of questioning, by and large, is very narrow, and they disregard even critical information or critical evidence that is adduced by the various witnesses who would be testifying under oath before this inquiry. Let me give you an example. As to what happens at the end of the day, what can they do? They can't arrest anybody. They can't order anything. They are not a court of law. So that's one of the reasons why we've been asking, well, why was there a need for such an inquiry, other than perhaps maybe served to be a public slaughterhouse? That's beside the point. But during the testimony, for example, it comes up. Yesterday, I think I made a very, I was questioning, why is there no question asked whatsoever about the one company that had been paid 8.7 billion rand without delivering one wheelbarrow of coal, and that company is Exxaro. Now, Mr. Singh today, when he was leading testimony, he makes this disclosure that actually that 8.7 billion rand has since ballooned to, I think, 11.4 billion rand. There is absolutely no betting of an eyelid by the members of the inquiry to actually even say, are they now going to be calling the people that signed that agreement, which is nothing but fraud on the company, that you can have such amounts of money that are taken out where there's been zero value. I cannot see the legality of such a contract. So effectively, I think the challenge that this inquiry has and will always be stand accused about is having a predetermined outcome and really having a public slaughterhouse. We just had I think when you were reading there, that the comments attributed to the spokesperson for the board of Eskom, who say, well, it's not so much about the legality, but so much what is in the public space. Now, it is a horror story to hear somebody who speaks on behalf of the board to make such an assertion. And I think even with Mr. Phasiwe here, I think that he didn't take legal counsel before he came on air, because the things that he's saying or what he's confirming, that the Eskom board will be moving towards that direction of having had an unlawful instruction that they must take certain action, that itself, I can't see how they're going to be able to stand in the court of law when they do get taken to court. And that, I think, confession that he made today, unfortunately, is going to make their case a lot more difficult. And this, Eskom can ill afford to have such elementary mistakes.
I mean, does this also give credence to the fact that Mr. Machela Koko says he started going after corruption at Eskom, and therefore he is now being maligned, he's being attacked, so to speak, and there were numerous processes within Eskom that had cleared him of any wrongdoing. In your view, is there that deliberate almost a fixation that this must be the next fall guy based on what aspersions have been?
Well, good evening to you, Cindy, and the viewers at home. It does appear so. Firstly, I find it rather odd that an instruction would come from the presidency, the deputy president per se, to say that these particular executives must be dealt with. And in the week following, those very same executives are actually going to go and sit in front of a public inquiry that is meant to discover whether there's any wrongdoing on their part. So there is a predetermined outcome, and that's why I must agree with Mr. Khadima over here that there's a predetermined outcome, that particular individuals are seen as the bad apples and they must be dealt with. Whether there's sound reasoning behind it or there's actual wrongdoing is another case. And I suppose we'll hear when Mr. Koko takes us through his evidence tomorrow. I also happen to have had sight of his affidavit, and to me it's coherent and logical. And he explains things step by step and how things came to be. The issue of prepayment to Tegeta, it's nothing new. Eskom has been making prepayments since time immemorial. I mean, there's many cost-plus mines that exist. The very mine Optimum was started off way back in the 60s as a cost-plus mine. And agreements have happened over the years. It's only when it was subsequently taken over by Glencore that the problem started, because Glencore wanted the price to be changed. Now, I wouldn't want to jump the gun. I will leave it to him.
What the inquiries have missed something, because as we mentioned, there had been very keen interest in getting to the bottom of state capture and state-owned entities and the influence or undue perceived influence there, that the inquiries may have missed something in what the conduct of these executives or their part in the rot that is going on there.
Well, I think from day one, the question has always been asked, what motivated the agency to start such an inquiry, which when it started, it did not have a clear terms of reference. So, for example, we don't know whether it has now become accusatorial or if it is still inquisitorial. So you inquire to be assisted as Parliament, and the question is that once that assistant has come through the various witnesses, what are you going to do with that testimony that they would have given, and what option do they have? Will it lead to perhaps saving Eskom in the current dire financial straits it finds itself in? The answer is no. In fact, by the time this inquiry finishes its work, we might not even have Eskom, and we might not even have a country, and the greedy profiteering privateers would have taken Eskom, because that is the royal game. The question that must be asked, and very legitimately, by the way, is that are our parliamentarians fitting the classic definition in Marxism of compradors of the bourgeoisie? And I stand to, I suspect that they are effectively using their position in Parliament to represent the interest of private investors, and those private investors are outside. So what you do, you create a big smoke to justify why Eskom actually, that it is a dysfunctional state-owned enterprise that stands to be broken apart in manageable parts and in the hands of the private sector. And everything else that I'm seeing, whether it's the utterances by the Minister of Finance, whether it's the utterances by the Deputy Presidents, or the noise that comes out of Parliament, it indicates, and even the banks, it indicates towards one direction only, that create enough cloud around Eskom, a dark cloud, which will justify, so that by the time the citizenry are now told that Eskom has been broken apart and sold off to privateers, there will be no resistance whatsoever. And I think that they are all mistaken. They must be asking themselves a simple question, all of them. In whose interest will it be for Eskom to be broken up. And the statement needs to come out of the leader of government business, which is the deputy president. And in the context, by the way, that not long ago, we are told that he disposed of his business interest to a related party. And when he disposed of his business interest to a related party, those businesses continue. And as those businesses continue, the interest that they have in Eskom is a question that must be answered, and there must be any sort of suspicion has to be effectively dispelled with substantive facts, not with just rhetoric of say, look, I'm dealing everything at arm's length, because it is too close to home in terms of what is happening. But why is Mr. Koko, particularly in this case, a royal game? And one of the things that I clearly suspect is the following, that apart from that, let's look at Eskom was spending R1 billion every month. The question is that who are the companies that were getting R1 billion to supply diesel? Today we've got emergency power. It's effectively they're still buying diesel, but they just call it emergency power. It's still costing a lot. And Mr. Koko is also opposed to the independent power producers. Now, one of the so-called energy experts, this one was trying to challenge me on Twitter and saying that there is a clawback in terms of the independent power producer cost. And it's an absolute lie, because I asked him, show me in the income statement of Eskom where there has been that recouping of the cost from the independent power producers. But also, why would it be acceptable? Because in the end, it gets passed on to the consumer, and the consumer in this country cannot afford.
Yeah, the smoke and screen, smoke screens, etc., and the veneer that we have to pierce through is also very complicated. And I think as citizens, we need to have a sense that whatever is at play, ultimately things will work out in the best interest of consumers, that the lights will remain on, that will have energy security, but also deal with the issue of corruption. We'll come back on the other elements that came out in the parliamentary hearing. Now, former Eskom Chief Financial Officer Anoj Singh says he did not lie to the Minister of Public Enterprises on Eskom's dealings with the power utility. Singh is appearing in front of the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises for the Eskom inquiry. And when he was grilled over the alleged illegal payments to McKinsey, he says the contract was finalized before he assumed duty. He also says, or also denied, that the Gupta family paid for any of his trips, including those to Dubai.
The negotiations for the McKinsey trillion contract and the approval thereof actually started way before I got to Eskom. So by and large, I inherited the program. I managed it, identified certain risks, and ultimately recommended to the board for its termination. The contracting with McKinsey followed Eskom policies, processes, and procedures, and national guidelines, instructions, and practice notes. We could not determine whether the contract was terminated in accordance with the termination clauses as contained in the contract, or was in fact terminated at all.
The board chairperson came here and said you lied to the Minister of Public Enterprises in responding to the question from Honorable Mazon. Were you involved in preparing the response for the Minister?
I was the acting group chief executive at the time, and the submission was prepared by the normal Eskom processes. It was recommended by Mr. Edwin Mabulani and Ms. Suzanne Daniels, and I then proceeded to sign the submission. If I recall, the responses to the question, I still maintain that we did not mislead in terms of the responses to those questions. In my view, the answers to those questions were accurate.
Were you, sometime in December of 2015, in Dubai?
Yes, I was, sir.
Who paid for the trip and the accommodation, all the expenses related to that travel?
Mr. Advocate Varana, it was not the Gupta family. It was actually a acquaintance of mine from the UAE, Mr. Al-Balushi.
Anuj Singh in Parliament as we speak with the Eskom inquiry continuing. And in studio, Tsepo Khadima and Zamo Mandlala joins us. Just your reaction, especially with some of the questions that the parliamentarians or Advocate Varana would have documentation. You know, the question around travel. Obviously, you can just pick up a call and find out from a particular travel agency or the airline itself and trace where the payment was made. Do you think that there's lack of preparation or preparedness on that, in that sense, on where the questions or how they are formulated?
Well, they've never been able to get out of the starting blocks. The starting blocks was to have had a clear terms of reference. They don't have clear terms of reference. Is it accusatorial? Are they accusing anybody? And if they're accusing anybody, what are they accusing that person of? Or are they just inquiring generally? That ambiguity is unfortunately the source of the style of questioning that we are seeing, whereby there is no nexus. So I'm just wondering what kind of a report they are going to produce at the end and what it will achieve. So the line of questioning to Mr. Anuj Singh is not surprising at all. For example, he says that when the Trillion McKinsey contract was signed, he inherited the contract already had been signed. But are we surprised that the contract with Trillion and McKinsey, or the non-existent thereof, was something new? No, because right here I speak about what is now 11.4 billion rand, where not even one wheelbarrow is delivered, because that contract as well, it should never have been that way. Now, as somebody who knows about geology, and I can speak competently about geology, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever that justified doing a take-or-pay agreement with Exxaro for the Medupi power station in Limpopo. No reason whatsoever, no geological reason whatsoever to open up a pit, to open up the section, to ramp up production. That is something that they would have been able to do within time. But why did they find it so necessary to guarantee Exxaro the revenues? And that contract this day, by the way, is continuing. And I'm hearing no call whatsoever that contract not only be terminated, but that it be investigated urgently, because clearly that contract could only have been done with inducement and corrupt practices in the end, because the geology will never ever be able to support that. Now, if they had been able to have subject matter experts who were assisting the evidence leader, in this case Advocate Vanara, if they had called people who know, they would have been able to assist him in asking questions that are probing, questions that show thorough knowledge of not only the processes, but of the industry and of the enterprise itself, is Eskom. So there are questions, as I say, they are in many instances don't make any sense. There is no nexus in terms of the line of questioning, because the people, you know, this is the blind trying to lead those that with sight.
While we're trying to find the connection, as you're saying, Tsepo, I'm not saying the fact that he resigned a day before appearing in front of Parliament, does that have any bearing in his testimony, or, you know, the weight of what he responds or how he responds to questions?
Well, I don't think it would necessarily change his response, because I would think that he's been preparing over time. The issue of him resigning, though, does cause some doubt to say, but if there's no wrongdoing on your part, why are you jumping ship? Now, I firmly stand behind Mr. Koko in his decision to say I'm going to sit until somebody shows me wrongdoing. The fact that the Deputy President has come out and said the board must deal with me, I must actually know exactly what am I being dealt with for, what have I done, and come out with evidence and say I have done the following. He's been investigated by Denton's, Cliff Decker, Hofmeyer and Gonki, and they've all exonerated him. He's gone through a disciplinary process, and the people who were supposed to come back and give evidence were then not willing to testify. Then he was cleared. So now, after all of that, what is then the reason that says he ought to be dismissed, other than perception? And I wonder, is perception enough now for somebody to lose their job?
Yeah, and that consumes a lot of energy and imagination. But if we were to look at what this commission, or inquiry rather, had also brought to the surface, the fact that there is a need to overhaul the supply chain processes within Eskom, that all these evergreen contracts, cost-plus mining, that stem back way before the dawn of democracy, now need to be thoroughly investigated. I mean, the fact you were just talking about the non-existence of contracts, that invoices are paid, but there is no particular record keeping. Basic accounting is not even being applied. This is beyond lack of governance, etc. Do you think that hopefully we'd be able to revisit these issues and thoroughly clean out or clean up at Eskom?
Well, what you need today is simply to say, look, you can't drive a car looking only into the rear view mirror. And what they're doing now, they're looking into the rear view mirror. I don't know. I think they're going to be bumping into a lot of things and even crash into a gorge. And what is that gorge? It's the financial abyss that they're about to fall into. So what the current board that has just been elected, by today, and I maintain this, by today, they should have been able to say, listen, we assist with the situation, this is what we understand and this is what we are going to do, because Eskom is that much more important and it is a public entity. So all of us as citizens, we've got vested interest in the well-functioning of Eskom, but also we need energy security because it is that important. Now, if we look at, for example, whether Mr. Singh's departure prematurely, effectively what they did, and I'm hoping that the advisors to the Deputy President will advise him properly, that he must walk the talk. He cannot play to the gallery. Just on Thursday, I think during Thursday or Wednesday, when there was the pre-Davos breakfast at the Hilton Hotel in Sandton, he was very wax-lyrical about what he learned from the Singaporeans about the importance of not interfering in how you run your state-owned enterprises. 48 hours had not lapsed. Already, the very same person issued an instruction, an unlawful instruction. So one can only hope that he will withdraw the unlawful instruction, because it is nothing short of interference, unlawful interference, if indeed he also believes that Eskom is that important and is a company that operates under company law. Therefore, the requirements of the rule of law must be applied at all material times. So there's no room whatsoever for that interference. And that is
we'll still look at the Davos, the WEF, or the World Economic Forum, and the delegation that is representing South Africa. So you'll stay with us. But Zamo, thanks indeed for coming through as always. Zamo Madlala, Radical Economic Transformation Coalition Secretary General, joining us in studio. And we'll be back looking at the work that South Africa has to do in promoting the country as an investment destination of choice, and what we expect of the delegation as well. Do stay with us. ANN7 is back just after this.